definitely action-packed, short, sweet, and with a whole lot of heat. We gotta break that glass, cause it's broken glass everywhere. I'm back with another book review, Christopher Columbus and the Afrikan Holocaust by the great elder, John Henrik Clarke. Let's kick it.
We've only just...
Oh yes, indeed. I like this.
Before I get started with this book review, go subscribe to the channel and click on my book review playlist and go check out my book reviews and see what I got going on over there, man. I'm digging in the scrolls, man. I'm bringing out the old classics, man. And people always ask me what I'm up on and my knowledge of self and what I've been reading. And you know, hey man, I've been digging in the crates, I've been reading more, and I've been going back to the old classics. So subscribe to the channel and look at that book review playlist. But let's kick it, man. Christopher Columbus and the Afrikan Holocaust by Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Also give the title some justice. Christopher Columbus and the Afrikan Holocaust, Slavery and the Rise of European Capitalism by Dr. John Henrik Clarke and forwarded by Leonard Jeffries. So you know this was action-packed, and if you watch any John Henrik Clarke video, seriously, when he doing his lectures and when he doing his teachings, boy, this sound like John Henrik Clarke wrote this. You know what I'm saying? Just reading and the jargon and the vocabulary that's used in this book. I could definitely tell if he didn't write it, boy, he was right next to the person who was writing it. And he was definitely involved, you know, because I just like how them elders speak, man. You know, when you hear them on their old audio tapes or lectures or, you know, just old audio and video that you see of them from the past. You know, man, I just like how the elders talk, man. And, you know, John Henrik Clarke, he's that man. He's that one. You know what I'm saying? Especially when it comes to scholarship. So let's get into it, man. You know, in this book, you know, it got Christopher Columbus in its title, right? So he talks a lot about Christopher Columbus, but he talks about everything that was going on with the slave trade and the African Holocaust that was going on then, that is still going on right now today. You know what I'm saying? He goes in, the great elder, he really goes in, you know, about that point in history. You know what I'm saying? So just because it's called Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, man, I think this book ain't but 105 or some pages or something like that. Man, there's so much knowledge in this that I can actually do a book review on this book for about 2 hours. But I ain't gonna do that. You know what I'm saying? I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna let you go and do the knowledge to it. But you know, we gonna review it, you know, and I'm gonna pull out some key points, you know, that I find are interesting, you know, something that you can put into your memory bank and put into your DNA. But let's get into it. Oh, also, something that was interesting in this book, right? They was talking about the different kinds of slavery. Dig, right? It was slavery going on, but it wasn't the kind of slavery that we was a part of. You know what I'm saying? It was slavery going on. Some of those different types of slavery was, man, I beat you in something. I beat you in whatever, the war or whatever. Man, you got to come on with me for a couple years. You know, you can still see your family and all that, but you finna work for me for these couple years, and then I let you go. The Columbus now, or Cologne, he goes into that. Christopher Columbus, he talks about that. You know, they came and then they did whatever that they did, and you know, mixed, diluted, tampered with, and made it horrific. When we talk about slavery, it's a bad thing, but they put it on steroids. You know what I'm saying? Also, in this book, you know, I got knowledge of self. So it's a lot of things that I've read and I still read. You know what I'm saying? And certain things that just automatically when I see it, it just pop into my head, right? They also talks about specific dates, 7/11 and 1492. You know, if you been on that journey of knowledge of self, you know, you heard about that. You know, he also talks about the Moors. Yeah, he talks about the Moors, you know, and just basically what they did and, you know, what they brought to the table, you know, around about this time, you know what I'm saying? But it had a lot of, it's so much stuff going on in this short book, You know, like I said, I'm gonna just pull out probably half, but this short book got so much knowledge and information in it that, yo, man, it can go on for hours. You know, he also talked about Mansa Musa. You know, a lot of us, especially in this social media and internet world, we look at Mansa Musa like that wasn't even real. You know, or people talk about him like a fictional character. You know, but Mansa Musa was real. You know what I'm saying? He was the great king. You know, and he brought that out. You know, he talks about religion. He had to talk about religion and how they use religion against us in the slave trade. He talked about our common language that we had. So even if we was, you know, in bondage, that we had a way to communicate. You know what I'm saying? He also talked about how they used the Bible against us. You know, so it's a lot going on in this book, man. It's a lot going on in this book. So, you know, I'm going to pull out a couple of them and, you know, we'll deep dive into it, you know. So follow with me, rock with me. Let's look at where he talks about Christopher Columbus. The literature exposing Christopher Columbus and the protracted crimes he set in motion is massive and still growing. Today, former Columbus cheerleaders have discarded the word discovery and are now using the word encounter. They too are aware of the fact that Christopher Columbus discovered absolutely nothing. So, you know, he talking about, yo, man, you ain't discovered nothing, so stop using the word discover. You had an encounter. However, has praised Columbus, saying his discovery led to the introduction of Christianity in the New World. What the Pope seems to have forgotten is a concept of Christianity created by Europeans for Europeans, and that this Christianity is now a handmaiden of European conquest and expansion throughout the world. Dr. Ben has said religion is the deification of a people's culture. By extension, I have also added religion is the deification of a people's politics and power intent. You know what? I was watching a video a couple years ago. I think Sarah Sumseti said that in a lecture. I don't know if he was saying it like it was his, but I think I heard him say that in one of his old recordings. Shout out to Sarah Sumseti. He always used to talk about Dr. Ben and Dr. Clarke. You know what I'm saying? As being a master teacher. He probably blowed the horn real loud for Dr. Ben and Dr. Clarke. So shout out to Sarah Sumseti with his crazy ass. Shout out, you know, to a lot of the scholars that was, you know, out at that time. You know, he said there's a need to call attention to Michael Bradley's work, The Iceman Inheritance. I'm gonna be doing a review on that. That's over there in my bookshelf. I need to show y'all my bookshelf too, though, cause I'm really real when it comes to this knowledge. With The Iceman Inheritance that deals very frankly with the rise and expansion of European racism. In the book by Francis Chris Wesson, The ISIS Paper, that deals with more specifically with the origins of white racism and how it affects African people. So, but you know, that's what they used to do back in the days. You know, they shout out people who they got the gang from or who doing a powerful work. You know, we don't do that nowadays. We want all the credit to ourselves. Some of the myths that was going on with slavery. I said myths. MYTHS, you know what I'm saying? Pardon my slang, pardon my fat tongue and all that, man, but ride with me. The myth of a people waiting in darkness for another people to bring them light. The myth of a people without a legitimate God. The myth of the primitive and the aborigines. And the myth of the invader and the conqueror as a civilizer. The most disastrous of all the colonizations was the colonization of the image of God. They denied the conquered people the right to see God through their own imagination or to address God in a word that came from their own language. See? They taking God from you. That's what they was doing, man. That's what they was doing. It talks about Imhotep. Egypt first became an organized nation about 6,000 BC. medical interest centers, I'm assuming that's a hospital, medical interest center, upon a period in the Third Dynasty when Egypt had an ambitious pharaoh named Zoser. Zoser in turn had for his chief counselor and minister a brilliant commoner named Imhotep, whose name means he who cometh in peace. In the ancient history of Egypt, no individual left a deeper impression than that of the commoner Imhotep. He was the world's first multi-genius. He was also the real father of medicine. Imhotep constructed the famous step pyramid of Saqqara near Memphis, and the building methods used in the construction of this pyramid revolutionized the architecture of the ancient world. Shout out to Imhotep, man. Peace to the God. You know, that's why we like reading. You know, we find out certain things, and you know, we really get into it. Talks about Mansa Musa, the real man with the deep pockets. The famous emperor of Mali, Mansa Musa, stopped at Timbuktu on his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. He went in regal splendor with an entourage of 60,000 persons, including 1,200 servants, 500 bondsmen, each of whom carried a staff of pure gold, marched in front of the emperor. 280 camels bore 2,400 pounds of gold, which this African monarch distributed as alms and gifts. Musa returned from Mecca with an architect who designed imposing buildings in Timbuktu and other parts of his realm. To the outside world of the late medieval period, the Emperor Mansa Musa was more than an individual. He was Africa. He conquered the Sungi Empire and rebuilt the University of Sankara. He figured by name on every map. In his lifetime, he became the symbol of mastery and the fabulous wealth of an unknown African continent. He was the most colorful of the black kings of the 14th century. He still held this position nearly 2 centuries after his death. That was Mansa Musa. Talk about Rick Ross. Go look at Mansa Musa. Talk about Liberace. Go look at Mansa Musa. Another book review that I talked about how the Europeans came and you know how we welcomed them in and what they brought was never good. When the Europeans first came down the west coast of Africa, they were treated as guests by the unsuspecting Africans whom they would later enslave. When the Africans began to suspect that the intentions of the Europeans were not good, in most cases it was too late, and they did not have the modern weapons of that day to defend themselves. See, and you know, that just talk about, you know, our kind-heartedness, you know what I'm saying, and how we just let you in and you just did us like that. He talks about the different kind of slavery, you know, like I was talking about in the beginning of this video. Slavery in ancient societies was different from the type of slavery that was introduced into Africa by the Europeans in the 15th and 16th centuries. In most ancient societies, the slave was held in servitude for a limited time for specific reasons, and in most cases, the slaves were captured in local wars. Skin color was not a factor as to whether a person did or did not become a slave, and in most cases, the slave had some rights that the master had to respect. In ancient Egypt, Kush, Greece, and early Rome, there were clearly defined codes of conduct governing the relationship between the slaves and the masters. Some of the earliest of these codes are recorded in the Law of Moses. See, I told you. It was different kind, man. It was different kind of slavery existing in West Africa prior to contact with Europeans is often used to excuse the European slave trade. The two systems had few similarities. The tragic and distinguishing feature of the slave trade that was introduced by the Europeans was that it totally dehumanized the slave. This dehumanization continued in many ways throughout the slavery period and well into the colonial period. This crucial act was supported by a rationale that was created in part by the Christian church and later extended by the writers of the 17th and 18th century. The myth of a people with no history and culture comes out of this period. All myths are contagious, and one can create many others. This fact can better be understood after some insight into how and why the slave trade came to be. At that time, most Europeans were ignorant about the shape of the world, and some of them thought it was flat. The first Europeans to visit the west coast of Africa did not have to fight their way in. They came as guests and were treated as guests. Later, they decided to stay as conquerors and slave traders. In order to gain position strong enough to attain these ambitions, they began to take sides in African family disputes, very often supplying the family or tribe they favored with arms, as pistols and shit, and using their favorites as slave catchers. A number of African nations went into the slave trade in order to buy guns and other European manufactured items. Others were forced to capture slaves or become slaves. See, I told you, man. See how they do when they come? See? The main problem with the African in dealing with the European during the early period was the African's tragic naivety. He had never dealt extensively with this kind of people. He came out of a society where nature was kind. Nature furnished him enough food, enough land, and enough of the basic things he needed to live a pretty good life. These old African societies were governed by honor and obligation. Land could neither be bought or sold. There were no fights over the ownership of land. Land belonged to everyone. See? After consolidating their position in Spain, the Muslims began to establish institutions of research and learning, whose brilliance was felt far beyond Spain's borders. This was an achievement not of the Arabs alone. It was brought into being by a combination of Africans and Arabs, collectively referred to by Europeans as the Moors. The word Moor entered the vocabulary of the Europeans, meaning blacks, as in blackamoor. See, Henrik Clarke, man, Dr. Henrik Clarke, he wasn't doing no hating. Whoa. Now, this was interesting. Yeah, we'll chop it up by this for a second. A fact that is often overlooked is that a large number of the crew of these 3 vessels of Christopher Columbus were criminals, let out of jail to go on this voyage because it was difficult to recruit others because of the apparent danger of such mission. Now, I said I wanted to bring that up because we used to talk about that. Man, we don't everybody don't want to go fight in the United States war, right? And you know, I'm a veteran, but everybody don't want to go and do that. I don't want to go be a part of that no more, right? Sending criminals. Columbus did. Columbus was doing it. He sent the criminals. Send the criminals out there, man, to do that, man. That's their punishment. Go sail the 7 seas. You know what I'm saying? That's your punishment. But yo, that was very, very interesting. Another one on how they, got into the family structure. Europe took full advantage of wars and conflicts between West African tribes and nations and began to purchase some of the captives and prisoners of war as slaves. The kind of slavery that Europeans was about to introduce into West Africa had no relationship to the African system of indentured servitude. In the African system, the slave was usually a loser in a local war. He was not enslaved separate from his family, and no slave was sent outside of Africa. Some slaves with talent rose to be kings. Let me read that again. Some slaves with talent rose to be kings in the very house in which they had been slaves. The word slave in West Africa had an entirely different meaning that it had when it was used by Europeans. The slave in Africa did not lose her or his humanity. Some African chiefs or kings became corrupt and went into the slave trade because they wanted to. Now that was interesting. That was very, very, very interesting. It was also a good point when he talked about another race of people and describing the mind, and how to overcome things. I have no great feeling for the Japanese and the new yellow racism that is developing among them, but I have great admiration for the way they recovered from defeat and dealt with their conqueror. They never let their mind forget about the nature of their defeat and who defeated them and how. The Japanese refused to let their enemy take away from them their self-confidence and their idea of God as they conceive God to be. If a people can hold on to that, you can recover from almost anything. Church. It covers a whole lot of ground. I'm gonna pull out a couple more, man, but this was interesting. The concept where he talks about Pan-Africanism. The concept of Pan-Africanism was created by 3 Trinidadians, H. Sylvester Williams, C.L.R. James, and George Padmore. Why is it that they could never unify Trinidad or a single island? The mission of Pan-Africanism was to unify the survivors of our Holocaust that Christopher Columbus and his associated European thugs set in motion. The Japanese, check this out, the Japanese sent their children to the leading schools of the world to learn all the necessary skills and bring them home. That's prodigal son, right? Are there any foreigners building their airplanes or building their ships? Nope, because they do it themselves. See, that's what you're supposed to do, man. And I ain't finna go off topic, but send the kids out, man, so when they can come back and they could be the best version for the community. They can add on to the community. Go send them out to get the best education and bring that education, that knowledge, wisdom, and understanding back on home. Yeah, man. Alton Maddox has said that the civil rights movement was a consumer rights movement, and indeed it was. We were fighting to consume everybody else's hamburger. We made white hotels rich by having our conferences there. All of the conferences that black people have each year would allow us to build 10 major hotels at once. Also, right up under that though, cold piece. For people to be free, they have to produce one sacrificial generation. A generation got to be sacrificed. That generation must be the role model for the other generations to come. Maybe a generation will have to wear dungarees so that another generation can wear tuxedos. One generation may have to wear dungarees. I was in the Navy, so I know what a dungaree is. But one generation may have to wear dungarees so that the other generation could wear tuxedos. John Henrik Clarke be spitting that. But watch this. Watch these next 2 points. The Portuguese forced their way in and built the first permanent fortification, Elmina Castle, the first slaveholder fortress in all of West Africa. And in this expedition was a little-known sailor, Cristobal Colon. Cristobal Colon, later known as Christopher Columbus. One more, and it's a cold piece. He talks about the color purple. Check me out. What I'm trying to look at is that the war on the Africans started before he got on the ship. This was a war waged on the structure of African society, especially the family, in that the attack on the black male started right there and continues to this day. The Color Purple was not a movie, it was a continuation of that war. You might have looked at it for entertainment, but that was not entertainment. It was propaganda, and as skillfully put as the propaganda that came out of Nazi Germany. More skillful because blacks participated in it and rationalized about it and said it was art. The Color Purple. Yo, this was a cold piece. Christopher Columbus and the Afrikan Holocaust by the great doctor, the God, John Henrik Clarke. Yo, this the bearded Heru. Yo, go check them other videos out. Those some cold pieces. And subscribe to the channel and click on my book review playlist and see what I got going on, man. I'm digging in the scroll, man. This the bearded Heru, and everything is real. Peace.
We've only just
Oh yes, indeed. I like this.